Let's go into the issue of universities. As I said, Australian universities produce more than 350,000 graduates every year. And that's 350,000 students who should be, they're certainly paying for it, receiving a world-class education. But it's now being reported that Australian university lecturers are having to lower their academic standards and dumb down courses. It follows attacks from highly organised networks of international students making coordinated attacks against staff members whose assignments and examinations are proving too difficult to pass. The University of Sydney confirmed it's received 135 formal complaints about staff regarding the coursework or assessments last year. A spokesman claiming, and I quote, a significant number of similar complaints indicates there was a coordinated approach among some complainants about a relatively small number of teaching staff. And they're not alone, it's hitting universities across the country. Gigi is an associate professor in the School of Economics at the University of New South Wales, and she joins me now. Gigi, thank you for coming on the show. What have you seen in terms of these attacks on Australian university lecturers about how difficult the exams might be or the type of coursework you're giving all students? You're not picking on anyone, you're giving all students to pass in a course.
Well, of course, I can't speak against my own employer, the University of New South Wales, but I've done some research in this area, and my concern is really to do with the admissions processes that we have in place in Australia in general. So we require high school students to submit an ATAR or a UAI one score that
programs. That system assumes implicitly that all students coming to Australian universities will be domestic. And in fact, over the course of the last 40 or 50 years, universities in Australia have had to increasingly rely upon foreign students for fee revenue to replace the clawback of Commonwealth funding. And because of that, we have had a huge increase in the ranks of Australian undergraduate populations of foreign students. And those foreign students are paying full fees, but they are not going through the same admissions process because there isn't any equivalent in overseas countries. And that's the basic problem here.
We know on that example, we know of the anecdotal stories, there's certainly material in the papers today about this issue, that there are a number of Australian students who say they're put into group class assessments with the foreign students with poor English language skills to sort of help them get through, that they struggle to follow lectures and tutorials, and that even in exams, some of the questions on exams are a real struggle. How on earth can they be learning, chemistry, physics, maths, any of the humanities subjects, economics, if they haven't got basic English language literacy, if the course is taught in English language?
Indeed, that was exactly my concern when I did some research on this back, I guess it was 8 years ago now, with funding from the Australian Research Council, and I published a paper in 2012 basically looking at exactly that question of whether or not international students are performing equivalently to domestic students and whether there are spillover effects within tutorials or other effects that accrue because of large concentrations of these students in classrooms. And I just studied students in business faculties in 2 universities in Australia using a panel data set, very standard best practice econometric techniques. To my knowledge, that paper hasn't been bettered in the last 8 years in terms of any other bigger and better panel data set on students. And I found, indeed, as you would expect, that international students do perform worse on average in my sample than domestic students, and there are negative learning effects within tutorials. I also found some evidence of inflation of grades, which as a consequence of larger fractions of lesser prepared students being enrolled in courses. So this was concerning to me, and the reason I asked those questions in the first place is because, as you say, you would expect, given the economic circumstances of this dependence on foreign students for fee revenue, that there might indeed be a problem in terms of the admission standards not being equivalent.
Is there a sense that the universities have sort of done a deal with the devil? They've decided to take the revenue even if it compromises the quality of the course, particularly for domestic students?
Well, it's a difficult bind that the universities find themselves in. Without the funding from the Commonwealth that they enjoyed in the golden years of Australian higher education back in the 70s and 80s, they've had to make up money in some way. And there are only a limited number of options. One of them would be to increase fees for domestic students. And indeed, we've had some people in the press and commentators generally propose that there shouldn't be a price difference for domestic versus international students for receiving equivalent degree programs from the university sector. But another option is to rely on foreign students, and a third option is to petition the Commonwealth for more money. Now, my position is that we should actually expect the Commonwealth government, given its power in this situation, to require students to actually be proven to be doing as well as domestic students by virtue of the universities submitting data to the Commonwealth as a precondition for receiving funding. I think that is an exercise of power that would be completely within the mission of the Commonwealth Department of Education, and that we should be expecting it to do in service to the health of the higher education sector as a whole.
I couldn't agree with you more, Gigi Foster. I hope someone takes it up. I might put that to the Minister Dan Tehan, the Federal Minister, and see what he has to say. Thank you very much for your time. Thank you for your analysis.
My pleasure, Peter.